Hello everyone. Today on Criminal Cases Today we are going to tell you the story of Nikki Allen, a 7-year-old girl who disappeared in Sunderland in 1992. The search for justice took over 30 years, with shocking twists and turns and a relentless fight from her mother. Get ready for a deep dive into this disturbing and emotional case. Let's find out together what really happened to Nikki Allen. It was Wednesday, October 27, 1992, and the city of Sunderland, in the northeast of England, was going about its normal routine. The air was filled with the scent of autumn, with golden leaves slowly falling and the sky painted the grey typical of this time of year. The streets were quiet as night fell, and the streetlights began to shine, casting long shadows on the sidewalks. Amidst this tranquility, no one could have imagined that something terrible was about to happen. Nikki Allen, a girl of just 7 years old, started her day like any other. She woke up early, ate breakfast in a hurry, grabbed her backpack and left for school, not knowing that day would change her family's life forever. Nikki was a shy girl with a sweet smile and curious eyes that always seemed to be looking for adventure. She was the second oldest of 4 siblings and loved to play with her younger sisters. That night, when she came home from school, she continued her routine of helping to take care of her sisters while her mother, Sharon, struggled to keep the house in order. Sharon, at 25, was a single mother dedicated to providing the best for her children. She worked 2 jobs to support the family, which meant she spent a lot of time away from home. Even so, she made sure to be present for the children's important moments. That night, however, Sharon was especially tired. Overwhelmed with household chores, she washed piles of clothes in the small apartment where they lived. The constant noise of the washing machines and the steam that built up in the air made the environment almost unbearable. With a pounding headache, Sharon decided she needed a moment of peace away from the chaos. "I'm going to visit Grandma J," she said, hoping to find some painkillers to ease the pain. Nikki's younger sisters, Naomi and Zara, were already asleep, tired from the day. Stace, her older sister, was engrossed in the television and lost track of time. Sharon thought she could go out for a few minutes, get the medicine, and return before the children noticed her absence. However, Nikki, always attentive and protective, insisted on accompanying her. "I want to go with you, Mommy," she said, holding her mother's hand tightly. Sharon knew she couldn't refuse her request. Nikki had an adventurous spirit, but she was also a sensitive girl who felt safer with her mother. When they arrived at their grandmother's house, who lived in the same complex, they were greeted by the sound of a vacuum cleaner. Nikki's grandfather was cleaning the house and didn't seem inclined to stop, despite the 2 of them being there. The sound was loud and disturbing, and Nikki, already nervous, became even more frightened. With her heart racing, she let go of her mother's hand and ran back into the house, her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. "I'll be back in a minute, honey," Sharon called out, trying to reassure Nikki as she waited for her grandfather to finish cleaning. Nikki, for her part, was certain that her mother would soon catch up with her. The condominium where they lived was familiar and, for Nikki, a safe place, where she and the other children would often play outside until late at night. It was a space she knew well, with every nook and cranny a part of her daily life. The distance to her apartment was short, and Nikki knew the way by heart. Confident, she walked forward, believing that she would soon be home, surrounded by her sisters. Sharon, however, took a little longer than expected. When she finally left her grandparents' house about 10 minutes later, she was met with an unsettling silence. The apartment was as she had left it, but Nikki was nowhere to be found. At first, she thought Nikki might be playing in a corner or perhaps hiding out, playing a prank. But as the minutes passed and the silence grew heavier, Sharon's concern began to grow. She called out for Nikki, her voice echoing through the hallways, but there was no answer. Feeling panic begin to set in, Sharon ran out, knocking on neighbors' doors, desperately asking for help. "Have you seen my daughter? She was just coming home." With each door that opened, the answer was the same: no one had seen Nikki. The concerned community joined in a frantic search for the little girl. Everyone knew the Allen family, and Nikki's disappearance came as a shock to all. The police were called, and before long, a helicopter was hovering overhead, its lights sweeping over the condominium and the surrounding area. The sound of the blades cutting through the air only added to Sharon's despair. She was in shock, her hands shaking and her eyes wide with fear. Questions flooded her mind, one after another, without pause. Where is my daughter? Is she lost? Did someone take her? Is she hurt? Does she need help? Amidst the chaos, Sharon was taken to her parents' apartment, where paramedics sedated her in an attempt to calm her down. Even so, her mind wouldn't stop. In her sedated state, she could only hear whispers around her, muffled voices talking about what could have happened to Nikki. Dark thoughts invaded her mind. What if she fell into the river? What if she went to the docks and something terrible happened? The fear was overwhelming, and the despair of not knowing where her daughter was consumed her. This tragedy took place in Sunderland, a quiet city in the northeast of England with a population of around 180,000. Known for its industrial history, Sunderland was facing hard times in 1992. With shipyards closing and coal mines running out, unemployment was a harsh reality for many. Amid this difficult economic climate, rundown areas emerged, such as the housing estate where the Allen family lived. Sunderland, with its quiet beaches and green parks, hid a difficult reality for many of its residents, including Sharon and her 4 daughters. Sharon, a young single mother, did her best to support her daughters, working 2 jobs and trying to provide a decent life for them. Nikki, her second oldest daughter, was a special girl, bright and curious, who loved being around her mother. Although shy with strangers, Nikki was Sharon's joy, a lively girl who brought smiles to everyone around her. Nikki had always been a curious and energetic child, and she loved to accompany her mother in all activities, no matter how simple. She liked being close to Sharon, feeling the comfort of her presence and exploring the world by her side. On that particular night, despite her tiredness, Nikki asked to go with Sharon to her grandparents' apartment. Sharon, knowing her daughter well, smiled and accepted her company, without imagining that this everyday moment would mark the beginning of a tragedy. The condominium where they lived was a familiar place for Nikki, full of nooks and crannies that she knew well. The building where her grandparents lived was just a few meters away, and the path there was something that Nikki had walked many times before. That night, everything seemed normal. But what no one expected was that something unthinkable was about to happen. The morning after Nikki disappeared, a sense of despair took hold of everyone. The search began early, with neighbors and family members joining in a desperate search. It was then that a frightening discovery changed the course of events. Nikki's shoes and coat were found in an abandoned building, known to everyone as Cass Sig. That place had a sinister reputation. It was an old, dilapidated building, covered in graffiti and completely avoided by the locals. No one liked to go there, especially at night, as there was a sense of abandonment and danger that permeated the place. When Nikki's belongings were found there, Sharon's heart almost stopped. The anguish, which was already enormous, became unbearable. The situation got so bad that someone had to call an ambulance. Sharon was taken to the hospital, where doctors tried to calm her down with sedatives. The image of the mother, devastated by loss and uncertainty, is something that will remain etched in the memory of everyone who was around. At that time, Gail and Vina, her close neighbors, played important roles in Sharon's life. Gail, her sister, was always nearby, offering help. Vina, Sharon's mother, although she had been estranged from her daughter for years, unexpectedly showed up at the hospital. Even though their relationship was strained, Vina didn't hesitate to take matters into her own hands, pushing Gail aside and taking control. It was as if, in that moment of despair, old conflicts were put aside in the name of family support. While Sharon tried to pull herself together, the community and the police wasted no time. The investigation into Nikki's disappearance continued at full speed. On October 8, at around 10:40 a.m., a teenager exploring the abandoned building made a discovery that no one would ever forget. In the dark, filthy basement, Nikki's body was found. She was lying in a pool of blood, her life brutally cut short. Although she was fully dressed, except for the shoes and coat that had been found earlier, Nikki had suffered 37 stab wounds and a fatal blow to the head. The tragedy continued to grow. Nikki's grandfather, who had always cared for his granddaughter with such affection, was the one who had the terrible task of identifying the body. The image of his granddaughter, who until recently had been full of life, now lifeless, was something that left an everlasting impression on him. It was as if the world around him had stopped, leaving only pain and emptiness. Meanwhile, Sharon, back from the hospital, was now at her mother Vina's house, trying to find some solace, but the pain was unbearable. The police, determined to solve the case, worked tirelessly. On October 9, investigators discovered that the brick used to hit Nikki in the head was likely the cause of her death, and not the stab wounds she had received. This detail added an even more sinister layer to the crime. A man covered in blood was arrested shortly afterward, raising hopes that the culprit had been found. However, he was released without charge, leaving the community even more confused and frightened. Doubts hung in the air, and the fear that the killer was still at large was palpable. On October 12, the police tried a new approach. An artist was called in to draw a sketch of a man who had been seen with Nikki shortly before her death. The sketch was quickly picked up by the media, in the hope that someone would recognize the suspect. But uncertainty continued to haunt everyone. The next day, October 13, police released a photograph of Nikki wearing the clothes she had been wearing on the night of the crime. It was a desperate attempt to gather any information that might help solve the mystery. They wanted to know if anyone had seen her with anyone or remembered any details that might point to the culprit. On October 14, authorities conducted a reconstruction of Nikki's last known movements. They hoped it would yield new clues, but the response was limited. The community was in shock, and fear permeated the environment. Finally, on October 18, a breakthrough in the case occurred. George Aaron, a 24-year-old man, was arrested. He was well known in the area and had a history of strange behavior. George had spent a lot of time in the abandoned building where Nikki was found. Although the evidence against him was slim, the community quickly pointed the finger, convinced that he was responsible. As chaos engulfed Sunderland, Nikki's family's grief reached its peak on October 30, 1992, when the girl was laid to rest in the local cemetery. The funeral was a moment of deep sadness and reflection for everyone. But even after the funeral, the search for justice did not stop. The police continued to investigate George Aaron. He initially denied any involvement with Nikki, but residents began to report seeing him with her on several occasions. New evidence emerged during the investigation. A knife blade found in George's home matched the stab wounds on Nikki's body, and blood spatter was detected on his clothes and shoes. Although DNA technology was in its infancy at the time, the discovery of bloodstains on George's clothes was a powerful clue, one that could not be ignored. George's sister, who knew his habits well, knew immediately that something was wrong. On the night of Nikki's murder, George came home with a strange expression, as if he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. He went straight to the bathroom without saying a word, and stayed there for half an hour, scrubbing his clothes with a determination that seemed more like a desperate attempt to erase some trace. This was unusual for him. His sister watched him from afar, intrigued and uncomfortable, but not knowing exactly what to think. When the police began to investigate, George tried to maintain a lie. He claimed that he had not left the house that night, but the facts began to unfold differently. Local residents, people who had crossed paths with him on that fateful night, said that they had seen George at the neighborhood snack bar, buying fries with cheese and onions, a simple snack that Nikki loved. It was the kind of food she could not resist, something that George perhaps knew and used to lure the girl to the abandoned building where the terrible events unfolded. The arson attack on the office of the lawyer who had defended George was a reflection of this desperation. The flames were not just an attempt at revenge, but an expression of collective grief. It was as if the entire town was burning with injustice, searching for a way to release the frustration that had been building up since the day Nikki's body was found. For Nikki's mother, Sharon, this period was even more difficult. She was not only dealing with the horrific loss of her daughter, but also with the harsh criticism and cruel rumors that spread like wildfire throughout the city. Some people, lacking any empathy or understanding for her pain, began to question her abilities as a mother. They spread rumors that Nikki was not being properly cared for, that Sharon had used the funeral money to buy alcohol, and that, as a single mother, she was unprepared to care for her 4 daughters. These accusations were especially painful for Sharon, who had grown up in foster care, never having experienced the love and support of a real family. Despite her own difficult childhood, she always did the best she could for her daughters. She took Stacy and Nikki to school every day and looked after Sarah and Naomi, making sure they were always well fed, clean, and clothed, despite the hardships she faced. The routine was exhausting, but she never let it affect the love and care she gave her daughters. As the years passed, the police seemed to have given up on finding Nikki's killer. Sharon felt that the authorities had simply let the case slide, as if her daughter's death no longer deserved attention. Every time she tried to get an update on the investigation, she was met with disdain or silence, as if she were being a nuisance. But Sharon was not one to give up easily. She began reaching out to other mothers who had lost their children in tragic ways, finding support and solidarity in their shared stories. Jean Jarvie, a private investigator who believed in Sharon and Nikki's case, became a crucial ally. Jean filed a civil lawsuit against George, and when he did not fight back, she won the case. This gave Sharon a glimmer of hope, as there was now a chance, however small, that George could be tried again if the police decided to reopen the case. Sharon understood that the media could be her greatest ally in the fight for justice. Determined to keep Nikki's memory alive, she called a journalist to her daughter's grave and expressed her desire to have the body exhumed for further testing. Even as she grieved over the past, Sharon knew that this was one of her few chances to get the answers she had been searching for. She believed that with advances in forensic science, new evidence might emerge that would help identify Nikki's true killer. With Jean's help, Sharon began her own investigation. She dedicated herself to finding out who else had lived in Sunderland at the time of the crime and what their activities were on the night Nikki was murdered. Sharon was no detective, but her determination and love for her daughter made her a tireless investigator. She interviewed neighbors, combed through records, and asked tough questions, always hoping to find even the smallest clue that might lead her to the truth. This relentless pursuit of justice did not come without a cost, however. Sharon was charged with disturbing the peace, causing damage, and even harassment in her quest for answers. Some saw her as a desperate mother, willing to do anything to get justice, others saw her as a troubled woman, obsessed with a case that many considered closed. But none of that stopped her. For Sharon, there was no sacrifice too great when it came to her daughter. Sharon moved more than once, moving to cities where she believed she might find people who knew something about Nikki's murder. She was willing to leave behind any comfort or stability if it meant getting closer to the truth. Sharon began to connect with a group of people she often saw at a bar. She tried to make friends by exchanging smiles and sending messages on social media. However, instead of creating new connections, she ended up getting into trouble. She was accused of harassment and ordered to stay away from those people. Sharon was very frustrated and exclaimed, "I need answers. I'm tired of being ignored." It was late 2015, and it had been 23 years since Nikki's tragic death. Determined to solve the mystery, Sharon decided to move near the home of the girl's former nanny, who she suspected was involved in the case. After several conversations with the nanny, she discovered that at the time of the crime, the nanny had been living with a man named David Boyd. This detail was crucial to the case. In early 2016, Chief Detective Lisa Tur was called in to re-evaluate the case using modern DNA analysis techniques. They had Nikki's clothes and a brick that could help solve the case. But when the results came back in February 2017, they were unable to identify the perpetrator because there was not enough DNA database to compare it to. In the meantime, Sharon did not give up and made an extensive list of possible suspects. She created an online petition calling for the case to be reopened, based on the new information she had gathered. As a result, several people were called in to provide DNA samples. David Boyd, one of the suspects, gave his sample on October 4, 2017. A month later, in November, scientists confirmed that Boyd's DNA matched that found on Nikki's clothing. Boyd was then arrested and questioned on April 17, 2018, and again in April 2019. David Boyd's trial began on April 20, 2023. During the trial, Judge Lambert made an important statement: "You are now 55 years old. When you committed this murder, you were 23. Over the years, you have appeared in court 22 times for 45 crimes, including petty theft and fighting. But your obsession with Nikki Allen was not an isolated incident. Boyd had previously been convicted of crimes including disturbing the peace and indecent assault." In addition, the judge noted that Boyd bore a striking resemblance to the sketch provided by a witness, Margaret Sun. She had seen a man who looked like Boyd with a girl shortly before the crime. The police found an old photo of Boyd, and when they compared it to the composite, the resemblance was clear. The trial ended on May 12, 2023, and it took the jury just 90 minutes to find Boyd guilty. But Sharon was still worried because she feared Boyd might be released after serving 29 years in prison. She believed he should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the end of the trial, Sharon was very frustrated. She saw on TV that she was not happy with the decision and said, "I'm not happy with it. I would have been happy if they had done the job properly. A family's life was destroyed because of this and nothing was done to fix it. It's always like that with us, and it seems like no one does the job properly." The story showed how a family went through enormous suffering and lived in the dark for more than 30 years. But a mother's determination helped reveal the truth and bring some peace to the family. So, do you think the murder was punished fairly? What do you think should have happened? Leave your comment below. If you found this story shocking and want to see more cases like Nikki Allen's, don't forget to like it now. Every click helps bring more stories like this to you. And if you're not a subscriber yet, be sure to subscribe and activate the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a new video. Join us on this journey.